Please.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm calling the Administration, Communication, and Technology meeting to order at 5:40 p.m. on August the 9th with myself and Patrick McCoy. Is there any comments, suggestions, petitions by residents in attendance regarding any items not on the agenda? Yes, please come forward.
Thanks. Just 2 minutes. My name is Jim Wiley. I live at 401 West Lafayette Street in the borough. I'm on the Sustainability Committee and representative on the Clean Energy Future Community Engagement Team. I wanted to tell you guys that last week, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, we gave a briefing to the Westchester Area Council of Governments. Patrick was there about, it's been 2 years since we formed the Clean Energy Future team. So we gave an update for about 15 minutes at that COG meeting. We now have resources for all 4 sectors of the borough. We broke it up into residential, small business, big business, and education. We have now resources for all 4 sectors on our website. And we just wanted to remind our elected officials that we're still here and about the goals that we've set and how we've got a plan to go about them, and ask for contributions from our elected officials for participation in events and materials, and suggest that in 2023, maybe earmark some budget items for doing more effective community outreach. The Sustainability Committee is drafting a letter to kind of itemize those asks, and I don't have that reviewed and approved yet by the SAC. We'll have that done in August. So I guess I'm asking if you guys would consider putting 10 minutes on the Borough Council work session to hear that briefing. Patrick's heard it, but I could trim it down and get right to the Westchester Borough specific stuff.
That would be 10 minutes on next week's, roughly.
I'm going to say September, because in
September
I'll have this letter from the SAC, and then
okay.
We could have those specific acts nailed down as well.
I have no objection with that. Do you?
No, I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
I'll also bring to your attention that some other communities are considering declaring a climate emergency. I know you've heard that kind of terminology. It would be a symbolic statement, but if you'd like to see some sample language for a resolution that Radnor Township is considering, I'd be happy to share that with you. And also any other funding sources that you see for community education about climate change. If you see any funds available, our team is really bad at deciphering, state and federal grant opportunities. So please keep that in mind if you see anything.
Yeah, Jim, I think there was just something I read that there's funds available. Maybe talk to Carolyn Committa's office, that there's something specifically for education that's just been announced in the past week.
I read through some of that. I don't know if it's the same thing. Fine, I'll follow up with Carolyn. The way I read it, it was only available to school teachers for that, and kind of training school teachers on how to do it. It wasn't available to municipal governments. But maybe we could finagle that, partner with the school district or with the university or something.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Discussion item A, the Borough Manager Report. And I believe before I get into that, Sean, I guess we're going to put that on the work session for September, the presentation by Mr. Wiley. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a few things in this month's Borough Manager's Report I wanted to comment on. Our labor contracts are ongoing, negotiations with the AFSCME union, and our next scheduled meeting is in a couple weeks, less than a couple weeks, August 18th. I wanted to announce the hiring of Judson Bullock in the Building and Housing Department. He now joins our code enforcement team. He comes from the private sector where he has experience selling, designing, fabricating, installing commercial furniture. So he's very familiar with reading plans, working with customers and clients. He's eager to get started and get trained up in our rental inspections program and other code enforcement matters and pursue certification in building code to be able to do plan review in the future. So we look forward to working with him, and that brings our code enforcement to staff to full staffing at the moment. Lastly, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time, if you don't mind, maybe 5 minutes with the committee talking about our audit of the financial statements. I printed copies for Mr. McGinnis and Mr. McCoy to review. Mr. Flynn, I put one at Mr. Allen's desk if you want to grab it. We're going to be going over it in greater detail tomorrow night, but I wanted to draw your attention to a few things in the report, because this is a long report and there's lots of information in it, but I think that I want to focus your attention on a couple big level ideas here. Between pages 15 and 16 in the draft financial statement, and the reason that we didn't put this on the website was because since it's a draft, we don't want to put something up on the website and then it gets confused with the final version that includes the management statement of management discussion analysis and any changes we make to it. So I think this is just a cleaner way to do it. So on page numbers, and another thing, you get to correct missing page numbers. So between pages 15 and 16 in your copy is a balance sheet for the governmental funds. And the general fund's the big one. That's where most of our expenditures come out of. And we finished the year with $2.2 million in cash plus another $865,000 in receivables for total net assets of about $3.1 million in the general fund, which was offset by liabilities of about $2 million, leaving a net position in cash at year's end of about $1.1 million. Now, I'm not including in that number that really big due to other funds you'll see in our general fund. I'll comment on that shortly. But I did want to draw your attention to the fact that $1.1 million is only 5.3% of annual general fund expenditures. It's typically best practice that you want to have, in our households, they say you have 6 months in the bank to pay for expenditures. For government, I've heard from audit teams and other managers that 2 months is a good minimum number. So if we had finished the year at two months worth of expenditures, we really should have 3.5 million in that general fund. We're not going to get to back to that level all overnight. I'm not suggesting we raise taxes just to get the general fund padded, but I think that we need to be cognizant of the fact that the general fund ends the year in a lean position. And so if we ever have a really tough year where there's lots of repairs or there's lots of legal bills, or you have a pandemic or anything like that happens, that we have enough space under the belly so that we don't scrape the runway. So I wanted to make that one point for everyone's benefit. And also wanted to make the comment about, on the same page, you see a rather large due to other funds recorded there in the general fund of $6.8 million. That's essentially saying that some point in the past, money was paid by other funds on behalf of the general fund activity that the general fund didn't reimburse those other funds. I can't tell you where all those transactions came from. It might go back 10 years, could go back 15 years, but they don't get erased when the fiscal year rolls over to the next year. If the general fund owes, for instance, the stormwater fund $50,000 last year, it still owes it $50,000 going into the next year. So those balances carry forward year over year. And I think there's been a systemic accumulation of these due from balances. When you look at page 37 of the audit, there's a schedule that shows all of the internal balances. That's all the money that all the funds owe other funds. Now, it doesn't tell you The general fund owes other funds $6.8 million. It doesn't tell you all the funds that comprise that $6.8 million, but you can make a pretty good guess, right? It's mostly probably the sewer and parking funds. So we have a plan to address this issue because I think it causes a little confusion. I don't like the books looking like this. The instructions and the working with the team in finance, with Barbara, the plan for this year was to make sure that our due to, due from internal balances, that we end this year in the same position that you're seeing in this audited financial statements, 9.1 owed, 9.1 gained. This is really the left hand owing the right hand. This is not a debt. This is just an imbalance between the funds. If we can successfully demonstrate that we've managed our general fund transactions, our sewer fund transactions, all the fund transactions, and satisfied those due to, due from balances in a monthly basis, and we get to the end of the year and we're still at $9.1 million, I think we're in a good position to come to council and say, council, do you agree that the general fund is not going to repay the sewer and parking fund these sums of money? And so basically write off those, a large amount of those internal balances. That's our plan. We're going to see if we get there by the end of the year. My proposal going forward is you may still see dollar amounts on this schedule in your audits going forward for internal balances, but it should really only be about a month's worth of transactions in any one fund, plus any crazy thing that might come up that we, some circumstance like that. That's our plan to deal with this issue. I know it's been around in the borough a long time, and I wanted to share it with the committee because that's something you're going to be hearing about tomorrow night and as we go through the budget and conclude this year. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? All right, and let's move to item B, which is the reapportionment of Westchester's voting wards. If we could bring that up, the maps, please. And Sean, do you want to give a brief background of what we did as a committee when we sat and we met last week?
Well, we've talked about this individually to come up with a scheme where, let me pause for a second and say, every 10 years, the United States Census publishes fairly accurate numbers at a very small geographic area of population. And we use that data and information to balance the voting wards, the 7 voting wards depicted in the map. And since 2020 was the new census, we got new figures, new numbers, and we have to look at our existing voting ward map, which is shown here in option A, and see whether or not we've balanced the populations, whether there's any racial imbalances in those population numbers, and that it makes logistic geographic sense. What I mean by that is you really can't have a ward that's all over the place and someone has to walk all the way across town and vote somewhere way far away from where they live. That doesn't make logistic sense. You want, and that was something I needed help with when we started this process. We wanted to make sure that the wards made sense at a neighborhood level. So option A depicts the existing voting ward boundaries. The pros of this arrangement is it's already in place. We already know where we're supposed to vote. We already know what geographies council people represent. The cons is that the population has shifted mostly between wards 4 and 5, having to do with the way that student populations were calculated both on campus and off campus. And it affects Ward 3 because that Ward 3 is adjacent to 4 and 5. And it does not meet legal obligations because there was a court ruling dating back now 36 years that said more or less voting ward populations have to be within 10% of the mean. Therefore, you can't have a really overpopulated ward, which would dilute the voters' power, so to speak, or a really a ward with a very low population, which would artificially inflate kind of the power, so to speak, of that ward. So option A was the one we went through. We went through options B, C, and D. B was our first attempt at doing this, where we broke up the university population, which is about 3,600 persons, more or less, in that green area. We broke it into equal sections and apportioned it to 3, 4, and 5. We thought we had figured it all out until Voter Services told us you can't not follow census block geography. So that's the con of this one. Going down option C. This is consistent with the court ruling and the 10% rule. However, it is a very strange geography, as you can see, because now all of a sudden Ward 5 has a very limited non-student population of around 125. Ward 3 becomes oddly shaped, as does Ward 4 a little bit. And then finally, option D, our data expert in-house found an algorithm, a tool, an application online where you can plug this into a very smart computer, and it tells you what the most reasonable apportionment is. The pros here is it is balanced, it is not gerrymandered, it is does not have racial bias. But the problem is that you have a voting ward that is entirely made up of a student population, which presents its own problem. So that's where we're at right now. I don't think we have a great solution. Is that the table setting you needed to start the conversation?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. And I'd like to call Mr. Sam Stratton. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Stratton was instrumental in getting the Westchester ward system where it is today. And I'd like to have his insight and also listen to his recommendations regarding the proposals.
Good evening, everyone. Ward system, I was very much involved in. I represented Mr. Melton, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Bond, and bringing the suit in 1985 before then President Judge John Stively. I live in Westchester, 612 North Franklin Street in the First Ward. At that time when we brought the suit, the mayor was from the First Ward and 6 of the 7 council people were from the First Ward. The exception was Mitch Crane, who later was president of this council, who was down in off Rosedale Avenue, where he resided. I think that's the 4th Ward. I have to look at the maps, it's been a while. The reason I wanted to speak is to remind council of the historic aspect of this suit. And you have to protect the diverse population and the Black and Hispanic population who were totally ignored under the at-large system. When I came to the town, I was under the impression when I moved here in 1982 that this was a very liberal town, Quaker heritage, Underground Railroad. Of course, I learned to the contrary. As you probably know, the Klan had an office for many years at 10 North Church Street. They wouldn't, the trash in the 2nd Ward was not picked up with any regularity. They wouldn't plow the streets with any regularity for the snow and things of that nature. No Black resident was allowed to be part of the fire companies. They had just broken the home rule, the homeschool situation, where the Black students were in the basement and the white students had the normal situation. Mr. Melton had started the Melton Center, because he didn't call it in those days, it was the community center, to give Black children options because they weren't allowed to join the YMCA. In fact, talking to older residents, they used to at times close down the YMCA after a day when the Black children were invited to decontaminate it so it wouldn't affect the white residents. Mr. Melton had run for council 3 times and won the 2nd Ward where he resided, but could not win borough-wide. He was constantly defeated, and most, as I noted earlier, most of the council people were from the first ward in this matter. They came to me and we decided to bring a suit alleging 150 years of voting discrimination. The Black community was very involved. I purchased membership in the Historical Society for about 30 Black females who then spent 2.5 to 3 months going through all the newspapers to figure out what went wrong in the borough. And we discovered that there had been a ward system in the 1880s, and there was representatives on the borough council from the Black community. Moses Hepburn, others, many of them are buried over this Black cemetery in the east side of town. But then when they started winning, the white community abolished the ward systems and placed a poll tax. And that was the beginning of the end of representation for over 100 years. With that information, Judge Stively originally had told me not to proceed with this case. I had a high regard for Judge Stively. Tried many juries before him. He said, "You're going to lose and we'll have to sanction you," but we changed his mind. The importance of the ward system is that the racism was so blatant. I lost every white client. They just took their business. That's why my practice is all over the state. I have very few cases, and even now. In Chester County, people would spit at me when I walked up the street. This is 1985, 86, and 87. In fact, when we won the ward system and Judge Stiley found discrimination, a white mob came to my law office, defaced it, and everything else in 1987. So it gives you an idea of what it was, but the importance is why you have to preserve this. Because this meant a lot to a lot of people. And I believe, and I think a number of people who lived during that time believe that if we hadn't won that, it would have been a recontinuation of riots that had been in the 60s. Mr. DeBaptiste was instrumental in working with us. It was a bipartisan thing. I was a Republican committeeman then, and I built the Young Republicans. My opponent was Dallet Hempel, my next door neighbor over in the First Ward, who was a Democratic councilman on the borough back in the 1980s in these matters. Mr. DeBaptiste was a Republican, but very active with us. And of course, we had Dr. Butler and then Mr. Ruskin behind the scenes in this matter. In the opinion, which I'll leave a copy, though I suspect you have it, but if you look at, for instance, on pages 20 and 21, they talk about the elections, and then Judge Stively talks about, in addition, Borough Council is frequently unaware of and unresponsive to the many needs of the Black community. Unlike all other districts in the borough, there are no municipality-owned or funded parks. I was in the Black community in the Second Ward. We now have John Green's Park, but we didn't have that then. John Green, you probably know, but he was the former chief of police, an excellent fellow. Problems and complaints with truck traffic, damaged water lines, and flooding unique to the 3rd and 4th precincts have gone unanswered. That was where a large portion of the minority population was. Insofar as evidence of these preceding factors, we have showed voting dilution and other matters. I'm not going to read it in detail. And then Judge Stively found there had been 150 years of voting discrimination. It was important. It was important to me because when I went into the Republican meeting as a committeeman, I was going to run for chairman of the Republican Party. I was, 5-generation family of Republicans. Every Republican committee person stood up screaming at me, "Get that N lover out of here." So I walked out and re-registered the next day as a Democrat. First person in my family. And then they made me chairman of Westchester, and we built. We won, finally took Westchester, and then I ran 10 or 11 times countywide as the Democratic county solicitor, filed probably 400 lawsuits. Took us 40 years. I've ran DA 3 times, judges 3 times, Congress, each of these races. But I say that to give you an idea that although it was 40, 50 years ago, there's still a lot of issues still that have to be addressed here. So having said that, that's why it's very important that the legacy of all the men and women who were involved, Ethel Clausen, Mr. Melton, Mr. Bond, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Ruskin, Alice Thomas, and others were real community leaders, and many others, has to be considered and can't be ignored. And talking to Mr. McGinnis, who I have a high regard for, even though originally we were at each other cat and dog when he came on the scene originally, but he's shown me quite a bit. I have looked at these, and right now, from what I can see, map C seems to be the one that would best preserve the legacy of the ward system. And I asked Mr. McGinnis about the percentages in Exhibit C. And he indicated, particularly in the second ward, because that was the linchpin, where Mr. Melton and others had tried to run and couldn't win, even though it was predominantly black because they would get outvoted borough-wide. He had indicated in the second ward now, because it's changed dramatically over the last 40 years with the new development, would have about a 25 to 30% black population, about a 17 to 20% Hispanic population, and then, of course, rest white population that's come in over the last couple of years with the new developments. But that would still allow a competent candidate who runs a reasonable race to have a chance of prevailing. We're not guaranteeing people seats, and the ward system was never meant that way. It's to give all aspects, all people, a chance to win realistically, and they could. And it seems like the 7th ward, and of course, we have Miss Dorsey, can be one still, and the 6th ward was one that we had Ann Airy even before the ward system came into place, who was later president of the Borough Council years ago. So it seems like this preserves it, and it's within the 10%. As you know, 10% is the maximum difference. My ward, the 1st ward, is way out of sync. I mean, it has to be changed. The numbers that Brian, Councilman McGinnis, gave me surprised me. I think they undercounted the 1st ward with all the new development. Because it seems to me there should be more, but I don't know. I'm not an expert in that. So I of course, had a chance to talk to your borough manager, who's very receptive, and your excellent mayor, who's obviously the daughter of former Mayor D. Baptiste, who I always considered the mayor, and he was a very wonderful man and still is. I would recommend option C, unless someone can show figures and I'm wrong. And option B looked pretty good, but unfortunately, you can't divide census precincts unless you want to create a major challenge, which I don't think you want to do that in this particular matter. That 10% is more for municipal, type elections. It's not for federal. It has to be closer, but that's not any importance here in these matters. So thank you for the opportunity to speak and tell the history and give you a sense of what the town was like and why the ward system came in. And I would ask you to consider seriously option C, obviously looking at the figures and all that. If there's any questions, if not, I'll sit down, and thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you, Mr. Stratton, and thank you for bringing this issue to our attention as we've discussed previously. I do think it is important to keep the integrity of the ward system. I know that there are some out there that want to get rid of the ward system. However, I believe that one ward, one vote makes the best sense. And as you mentioned before, in your previous experience, one ward, for example, could control all the members of borough council
And the mayor.
and the mayor, and thus disenfranchising other wards.
That's what happened in the 1st ward. Has a lot of money, and they just bought the elections. That's what. And the ward system, beside the diversity it's wonderful for the neighborhoods, because you have everyone in each neighborhood has a chance to, as each one of you gentlemen and the lady, when you have a chance to be and serve and represent your community. It didn't happen before. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any questions here?
No, none for me. I really appreciate the history of that. I knew the outcome, but I didn't realize the really sad, staggering impetus behind it. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
And based upon the court case as well as the feedback from voter services, I'd like to make a motion then that we move forward with option C. Oh, go ahead.
So I'm Sheila Vaccaro, Ward 5 councilperson. As a child, I first moved to Westchester in 1978. I lived in the 7th Ward, right next to the 1st Ward, but in the 7th Ward, in a very mixed race, dark-skinned community. I am vehemently opposed to option C, because what you are asking me to do is represent 5 blocks of the borough and the entire university borough campus, which is comprised primarily of one-year students. When I lived in the 7th Ward, the community pulled together, rose up, came to Borough Council, and requested that a bar that was extremely disruptive be shut down. The women, primarily in the community, came to Borough Council, and legal counsel was brought against them. They felt attacked, belittled, demeaned, and then the Caucasian mothers who came to the group, and there were 2 of them, were pulled aside by counsel and told point blank, there is no need for you to live there. Leave and you will be fine. And both mothers moved their families, and that is why I left the borough in 1988. So it was not a good place. It was terrible. I am so extremely grateful that the ward system is in place. I am proud to represent an entire ward in this community. But what you're asking me as Ward 5 councilperson is to represent basically 5 blocks of my community and then a silent population at Westchester University. I am very sorry to ask this, but I'm begging you to go to court and do something about the way the university is represented. This is option B or option D makes more sense for the community of residents in our borough. The people, so the university is broken up where you have the primarily freshman students in the borough, and all the upperclassmen either live in their own units in 4 or off borough property. Those kids in 5, in that little university block of 5, are there for a very small portion of 1 year. They don't have time to get to know each other. They don't have time to get to know the borough. They're coming from all over the place. It's going to be really hard for them to represent themselves, which would be option D, which would be, if there was a way to do that, that would be brilliant. And I would love to see some student engagement, but it's going to be a really difficult thing. Option B, I understand it's currently not legal, but it's the only option that makes sense for the community in Ward 5, for the rest of the borough. Basically, what you're proposing is giving 5 blocks in my neighborhood the same power as all of Ward 2 and 1 and 7. You guys, it makes no sense. I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. And I just want to bring up Mr. Stretton real quick to answer that question regarding going to court. Is that plausible, or has that already been settled? Breaking up voting blocks.
It's been settled, but I think it could be reconsidered. I mean, I like option B too, like she does. Obviously, anyone who looks at option C and looks down and the college here recognizes that you essentially have one area that's not part, that really doesn't have residents, or the few residents there are going to be outvoted. That's a concern. Remember, I'm biased because of what I've gone through. My concern is more protecting the legacy and the purpose of the ward system. And option C, B would do it, but it's right now illegal. But option C is the best proposal so far on the board. But I believe we could go in and we'd hardly have to go to federal court to do it, though. I don't think our county court could reach that decision. But ask your good solicitor. She probably knows municipal law better than I do in these matters.
So then the real question is going to be, are we going to take this to federal court?
Am I going to take it to federal?
No, or is Westchester Borough going to go ahead with option B and take it to federal court?
Clearly, you would be challenged by someone in that matter. My suggestion, despite hearing what she says, but the excellent speech made a second ago, is to stay with option C, protect the legacy, but start working within the community to make the changes in 2030 and things of that nature when the next census takes place. And I still believe there's an undercount. When we did the ward system, it was 18,900 residents, something like that, or maybe it was 17,900, right around there. And you told me there's still only 18,000 residents. I can't be with all these developments. So somewhere along the line, the census count, and I think Mr. Flynn would agree with me on that, is off. But that's right now we can't deal with that. We're stuck with the census count. And option C is the best right now. And we're going to have to work on the other issues over the next 10 years, your council and your successors. But she makes good points. But remember, I'm biased. It's easy to come in. I'm trying to preserve the legacy. You have a broader responsibility. But I still think option C is the best right now to preserve what we fought for and what was good for the town. But that issue has to be dealt with at some point. And if you're going to go to court, I'll be glad to do it to protect you or help you on that issue, although you got very good solicitors who know their way around courtrooms very well. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further comments?
Question. Mr. Stratton, since the option B is not the way it's supposed to look, if we select option B, right, somebody's going to challenge it, or the Commonwealth will challenge it, the Common Police Court, right? So,
Well, if you select it, you're going to then hire me, her solicitor. I was pointing the solicitor table, or someone to file a suit to allow you to do it because of the need for more diversity in town and because it creates a very unfair situation down in the far end, the south side of town, with the college not having a real, and the residents down there not having a real representation. So you have to be prepared to do that. And I certainly would take it on, but there are probably far better lawyers than I who know election law even better. But I'd be glad to do it. But my role is to preserve the ward system. If you adopted a system that I thought, like, I saw a couple of them, 3 at large and 4, some of the proposals floating around 4 wards, we'd be in the court the next day on those issues. But I think, Mr. Flynn, B's a good option, but it's going to take a lot of litigation. And so my advice is to go with C and then start working on the problem with the college and then in 10 years from now, have a better solution.
why was the second ward split from east and west? Is that for population as well?
It was more voting. They were afraid that they wouldn't get to if we didn't split it, people wouldn't get to vote because it was too far. So they had 2 different voting places. Recently, they've changed that, because of the virus. but that was the reason why. And if you all look at the old ward map A, you might say, why did it go over across High Street? That was because the then Republican chairman and councilperson, Steve Hansel, wanted to be in the first ward. So he lived on that corner, so they moved it over our objections, but we could only win so much. That's why it was a little distorted back in when we first started it. And I remember back then we didn't have computers. It was a very difficult job. We brought in the provost of Temple University to help us put together the actual figures. Ms. Fetterman, her name was, and she's now, I think, the dean of some school up in New England. But, I mean, the answer is that the speaker makes a good point, but I don't think there's an easy solution, but we do want to protect the legacy right now. But it's something the council's got to look at in the future, the role of the college and what it's doing to the neighborhoods. As you know, if you live in where my office is, and you see the drunken students every night walking up and down the street, there's a lot of need for reform and change.
I agree with you, and I agree with Mr. McGinnis. The super block down at the university brings zero. It doesn't bring anything favorable to the borough. They don't pay taxes. They don't pay stream protection. We collect no revenue from that super block, but then they're going to punish Councilwoman Sheila with people that won't vote or won't even register. And as you said, that's unfortunately, that's not kosher for me. So
It's a problem, and that's why you guys get the big bucks to make these decisions. So,
Thank you. With that being said, Sean, can we add this to the work session under discussion then? All right. Let's move to item C, consider creating a subcommittee to assist and support residents and businesses in performing historical research.
I suggest this item be tabled since I think it was something that Councilperson Allen was spearheading.
Yeah, we could table that to the next meeting then. Item D, consider the request from the bid to provide a grant support letter for a Keystone Communities Program grant to help the facade improvement grant program.
Thank you, John O'Brien, Executive Director, Westchester Business Improvement District. I will keep this brief. The bid launched this year with our own funding, 2 grant programs, one being a facade improvement grant program and one being an alleyway beautification grant program to help commercial properties within the bid have access to funds and incentives to do not only new work to their buildings, but also the routine maintenance. Obviously, we all know Westchester's an old town, and these buildings take a lot of love to keep them up to snuff. We are applying through the state for this grant, probably in the range of $10,000 to further enhance our ability to get funds to the business owners for the general upkeep of their buildings. There is no request of funds from the borough, just ask for a letter of support.
I don't have any issues with that.
Just curious, what's the success so far?
In my 2 years with the bid, we've secured approximately $15,000 in DCED grants. This is a program that's offered statewide. Organizations like the bid, as well as municipal entities and some other nonprofit categories qualify for this. But I do feel fairly good about our chances for this program.
Do we have something in place now, though, however, right, for facade improvements?
Yes. So the bid, through our internal budget, we fund the program currently $5,000 for the facade and $5,000 for the alleyway beautification program. We intend to continue doing that in years forward. So we were just trying to leverage the existing dollars that we're contributing towards this to get more state funding on that front.
Good. No, I appreciate it. I was just curious about the experience of those.
Yeah,
programs.
this year the program was oversubscribed. It's a matching grant. We offered $500 or up to $500. It was a 50% matching grant. On the facade improvement grant, we were quickly overprescribed for that. The alleyway beautification grant won't be having a second round of funding for this fall.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'm all for supporting it.
Same here.
Thank you.
Item 4A, approve the July minutes.
I'll move to approve.
All right, second. And then item B, approve a resolution authorizing the borough manager to sign a non-exclusive video sharing license agreement with PennDOT.
This is curing a procedural defect. We did this earlier, a couple months ago, but they need a resolution, not a motion. This is for video feeds from cameras on 202 to become part of our alert system.
Just a resolution to approve. All right, I'm fine with that.
Likewise.
Other business, this is the update on the borough website app.
Good evening, everybody. For those of you who haven't met yet, my name is Nick Fink. I am the Data and Enterprise Application Manager at the Borough. I've been here since February. I've been working on some apps recently. So this is our latest one that just launched. So basically, this is a service area lookup app. So if you put in a address in the borough it will verify that it's in the borough. It'll give you all of our contact information. Pulls up, parking permit area, so obviously there it doesn't require one. Waste and recycling, voting boards, water and sewer, a bunch of other things. Public schools. Really the point of this, and if you click outside the borough, Bill, hit clear on that blue button up top, and click somewhere outside that yellow line. It'll pop up with the correct town's information. So the idea here being that people seeking services with the borough, I think there's 17 municipalities covered by the Westchester area code. So we get a lot of confusion about what town is responsible for what. So for people who are new to the borough or need to look up something about the borough, this app will tell you a bunch of information about your address, where you're serviced, things like that. And for those who aren't in the borough, it'll tell you what municipality you actually should be contacting. And hopefully this will, reduce some confusion around people looking for services from the borough. So that's that particular one. And then we also have, Bill, if you wouldn't mind, the zoning app. So previously we had a static PDF map for our zoning. This app now, again, similar concept. You put in an address in the borough, pull back all your zoning information. So hopefully this will also help to reduce some burden on developers or anybody in the town. Links out to our code, makes it easier to understand what's available to be done at any given property. And Bill, if you wouldn't mind going to the last one, please. The travel alerts app. So previously these were just on the front page or their own page. So this actually digitizes those travel advisories that are currently posted on our website, digitizes them, shows you what section of road is affected. And Bill, if you were to go to Chester County up in the top right, this will give you everything going on in Chester County coming from PennDOT, the county police CAD, as well as the borough ones, and then all the way up top. These are real time, what's happening right now, and then future alerts are anything that is going to be happening in the near future that we are aware of. So always looking for feedback. Any feedback can be sent to data@westchester.com. Already taking this feedback into account. We were asked to put in fire departments. Fire departments are in there now in the first service area lookup app. Any feedback's welcome. There's no questions.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, then looks like we can end this meeting then at 6:30.